When we think of the Old Testament prophets, our minds usually jump to these mysterious, long-bearded fortune tellers, right? But what if I told you their real job was something way more specific, something a lot more like a lawyer? Today, we're going to unpack what really made these figures tick, and trust me, seeing them as legal experts changes everything.
Seriously, think about it. For most of us, that word prophet immediately brings up someone predicting the future. A mystic, a seer, a bit of a fortune teller. And hey, that's the popular image. But it's also the very thing that makes the prophets so confusing, because it's only a tiny, tiny piece of the real picture.
The real story is so much more grounded, way more legally precise, and honestly, it's way more interesting. It's a story about a contract, a high-stakes relationship, and the people whose job it was to hold it all together.
So let's just get this out of the way first. The prophets are probably not what you think. See, if we only view them as future predictors, their messages feel, well, kind of all over the place. One minute it's all doom and gloom, and the next it's this incredible message of hope. It can feel really contradictory, but that's only because we're missing the key that unlocks their entire mission.
And here is that key. The one single concept that makes everything they say and do make perfect sense is a contract. More specifically, it's the covenant between God and ancient Israel. Everything, and I mean everything, they did was about enforcing the terms of this foundational agreement.
Okay, so what was this ultimate contract? Well, this covenant, it wasn't just some friendly pinky promise. No way. This was the constitutional foundation of Israel's entire national existence. It was a binding, legal agreement that spelled out their relationship with God, Yahweh. Think of it like their Constitution and their Declaration of Independence all rolled into one. It was that big a deal.
And what's super fascinating is that this covenant followed a specific legal format from the ancient world. Scholars call it a suzerain treaty. It was basically a standard political contract between a powerful king, the suzerain, and a smaller dependent nation, the vassal. It laid out all the terms of their relationship in a very clear, almost juridical way.
And these treaties had a standard structure. First up, you've got the preamble, which just identifies the big king, in this case Yahweh. Then you have the stipulations. These are the rules of the agreement. The biggest one, exclusive 100% loyalty. And third, and this part is absolutely crucial for understanding the prophets, were the sanctions, a very clear list of blessings for keeping the contract and curses for breaking it.
And when I say specific, I mean specific. These weren't random punishments just based on God's mood. They were predefined consequences written right into the contract. If Israel was faithful, they could expect things like good harvests and national security. But if they were rebellious, the treaty itself said there'd be drought, foreign invasion, and eventually, the ultimate curse, exile. It was all spelled out right there in black and white.
So where do the prophets fit into all this legal drama? Well, they were heaven's authorized messengers. Suddenly, their job description becomes crystal clear. They weren't just making up new rules or pulling predictions out of thin air. Their entire job was to enforce the terms of this pre-existing contract.
I absolutely love this term, covenant administrators. It just hits the nail on the head. A prophet was an official messenger, an emissary sent by the great king to his people. They'd show up and say, hey, remember the treaty? Well, what you're doing right now, that's triggering this specific blessing. Or, more often, that's triggering this specific curse. They were just applying the contract to real life.
But wait, how did a prophet get that kind of authority? Where did they get their intel? Well, according to the texts, a true prophet had access to the divine council. You can picture this like a heavenly boardroom or a Supreme Court session, where God is presiding and the decisions that shape history are being handed down.
And that right there is what separated a true prophet from a false one. A false prophet was basically just sharing their own opinion, speculating, wishfully thinking about what might happen. But a true prophet, they claimed to have stood in that council, heard the official verdict, and were now just proclaiming a decision that had already been made. Their message wasn't a guess, it was a report from headquarters.
So that brings us to the actual verdicts they delivered: judgment and hope. When a prophet announced judgment, it wasn't some new threat. Nope. They were simply acting as the court's messenger, declaring that the people's actions had officially triggered the curse clauses of the covenant. And when they talked about hope, they were just reaffirming the king's long-term, faithful commitment to the contract itself.
Now, the number one crime the prophets went after was idolatry. And from this legal, covenant point of view, worshiping other gods wasn't just some minor religious slip-up. It was the legal equivalent of high treason. It was a complete and total rejection of the sovereign king who started the whole relationship.
And the prophets were masters at connecting the dots, showing how this one act of treason created a domino effect that wrecked the entire nation. Once your ultimate loyalty is messed up, everything else rots from the inside out. Your worship gets distorted, justice becomes corrupt, the rich start exploiting the poor, society unravels, and it all leads directly to that final covenant curse, exile.
See how this changes everything? Suddenly, the prophet's warnings of judgment don't seem so arbitrary or just angry. It's logical. It is the direct, predictable, legal consequence of a nation breaking its own constitutional agreement. It's pure cause and effect.
And you know what? The same exact logic applies to their messages of hope. All those amazing promises of restoration and return weren't God suddenly changing his mind. They were actually rooted in the character of the sovereign king. He was also bound by the contract, and his ultimate goal was always to preserve the relationship, even if it meant using the harsh discipline outlined in the treaty to do it.
Okay, so why does any of this matter? After all this talk about legal frameworks, treaties, and sanctions, it's so important to remember what this whole elaborate system was designed to do. It was all built to serve and protect one thing, a relationship.
And that, right there, is the big takeaway. When you really get this covenant framework, the prophets are transformed. They stop being weird, mystical fortune tellers, and they become what they truly were, passionate lawyers for a relationship. They are God's emissaries, pleading with the people to come back to the very agreement that defined who they were and was the source of all their blessings.
Because when you strip away all the legal language, all the stipulations and the sanctions, what you find at the very heart of the contract is this one simple, profound promise. This is what the whole thing was designed to protect. It was about belonging, about identity, and about a deep, committed bond.
So I'll just leave you with this to chew on. If we stop seeing the prophets as future tellers and start seeing them as these fierce, passionate defenders of a foundational relationship, how does that change the way we hear their words today? What does their intense call for justice, for faithfulness, and for loyalty mean for us right now in a world that's still trying to figure out how to live together? Definitely something to think about.